The cold air of the operating room stung Richard's skin as nurses prepped him for the heart surgery that could determine his future. The steady beeping of the monitor filled the room, but his heartbeat wasn't the only thing racing. Just minutes before the anesthesia kicked in, his phone buzzed with a final message from Mia. "It's over." 2 simple words, no explanation, no goodbye. After years of building their life together, she chose the moment before his most vulnerable battle, to end it all. As the anesthesia dragged him into unconsciousness, one thought burned into his mind. Why now? When he woke, the sterile white ceiling greeted him, but Mia was nowhere in sight. Instead, Abigail sat beside his bed, her eyes swollen from crying, her hands gripping his weak ones tightly. "I'm here," she whispered softly. Richard's throat was dry, but he forced the words out. "Where's Mia?" Abigail's lip trembled. "She didn't come, she's with Joseph." The name struck harder than any scalpel could. Joseph, his best man, his so-called brother, the man he trusted with everything, had been seeing Mia behind his back. And while Richard was fighting for his life on this table, they had already moved on, flaunting their affair as if the years he spent loving and sacrificing meant nothing. News traveled fast. Pictures of Mia and Joseph holding hands at high-end galas spread across social media like wildfire. Headlines praised their new power couple status while Richard was still recovering. Both physically and emotionally shattered, Abigail leaned in, lowering her voice. "They're planning to get married next month." Richard's face hardened. The sharp pain in his chest wasn't from the stitches. It was betrayal cutting deeper than any blade could reach. He looked into Abigail's concerned eyes and whispered, "They won't get away with this." Richard had always been the kind of man who built everything from nothing. He wasn't born into wealth or privilege. Everything he possessed was the result of years of relentless hard work, sleepless nights, and unshakable determination. In college, while others partied, Richard worked 3 jobs just to afford tuition. It was during those difficult years that he first met Mia. She was different back then. Sweet, ambitious, full of dreams. She studied marketing, and their paths crossed at a university event. Mia was charming and radiant, and Richard, despite his rough edges, found himself drawn to her warmth. They started talking, studying together late into the nights, supporting each other through exams and internships. Mia became his first love, his only love. As they graduated, Richard threw himself into building his company, a consulting firm specializing in financial restructuring. Mia stood by his side through the early struggles, offering encouragement when investors rejected him and holding his hand when deals fell apart. While Richard tackled business, Mia worked in public relations, using her skills to help him network and attract clients. It was a partnership, or so Richard believed. The company grew and success followed. Contracts poured in. The firm expanded from a tiny office into a multi-floor building downtown. Richard's company became one of the fastest-growing consultancies in the city. With every success, Richard made sure to remind Mia that it was their victory, not just his. He showered her with gifts, romantic getaways, and promises of a future together. As years passed, their relationship seemed solid from the outside. Friends admired their seemingly perfect partnership. Business partners by day, soulmates by night. Richard trusted Mia blindly, never once questioning her loyalty. They shared everything, including ownership stakes in the company. Out of love, he transferred a sizable portion of shares to Mia, telling her, "This isn't just my company, it's ours." Joseph had been Richard's best friend since childhood. The two grew up together, faced hardships side by side, and stood as each other's best man at countless milestones. When Richard's business expanded, Joseph was one of the first people he brought on board. Joseph was charming, smooth-talking, and well-connected, a perfect fit for managing external partnerships. Richard never doubted him, treating him like a brother. But somewhere along the way, lines blurred. As Richard spent long hours securing deals and expanding operations, Joseph and Mia grew closer. At first, Richard saw it as harmless. His best friend and his fiancée bonding was only natural, or so he convinced himself. He was too focused on the company's IPO, the meetings, the acquisitions. The signs were all there, but love often blinds even the sharpest minds. Their engagement was supposed to mark a new chapter. Richard had already commissioned a custom ring, and the wedding plans were slowly taking shape. Everything was falling into place, until it wasn't. The first real crack appeared when Richard was diagnosed with a rare heart condition. The doctors recommended surgery, a complex procedure with significant risks. Mia's initial reaction was supportive. She held his hand, promised to be there through every step, and reassured him that they would face it together. In the weeks leading up to the surgery, Richard put his affairs in order. He updated legal documents, ensuring Mia would be financially secure if anything went wrong. He made Joseph temporary acting CEO during his recovery, trusting him to protect the company in his absence. But as the surgery date approached, Mia's warmth began to cool. She grew distant, often citing work obligations or vague excuses for missing appointments. Joseph filled the void, visiting Richard often, updating him on company matters, and assuring him that everything was under control. The morning of the surgery, Richard sat alone in the hospital waiting room, his chest tight, not from fear of the operation, but from the gnawing suspicion growing inside him. He texted Mia, but she didn't respond. Instead, as the nurses prepared him for surgery, his phone vibrated with her final message. It's over. The world spun around him. He was moments away from being unconscious, and the woman he loved had chosen that exact moment to end everything they had built together. When he finally woke up, Mia was gone. She never visited. No flowers, no texts, no calls. Only Abigail was there, standing as a silent witness to his heartbreak. Abigail had been a close friend for years, almost like family. She was fiercely loyal, never seeking anything from Richard other than his well-being. Abigail had always been careful not to cross boundaries while Richard was with Mia, but now her concern was unrestrained. As Richard slowly recovered, Abigail stayed by his side, managing his personal affairs and shielding him from the media circus growing around Mia and Joseph. News of Mia and Joseph's relationship became public quickly. Paparazzi captured them attending charity galas, hosting dinner parties, and vacationing in tropical resorts. They had become the city's new power couple, stepping into the spotlight Richard once shared with Mia. The betrayal was absolute. Richard wasn't just discarded, he was replaced. His best friend had taken his place beside Mia, both personally and professionally. Joseph began making moves within the company, slowly consolidating power, while Richard recovered in silence. Abigail brought him constant updates. "They're not wasting any time," she said one evening, her voice laced with anger. "They're already planning their wedding." Richard clenched his jaw. The pain in his chest remained, but it wasn't from the surgery anymore. It was the weight of betrayal crushing him from the inside. He looked out the hospital window, the city skyline glowing under the night sky, and whispered to himself, "They think I'm weak, but they have no idea what's coming." Richard was discharged from the hospital 2 weeks after surgery. His body was still weak, but his mind was sharper than ever. The moment he stepped into his penthouse, reality struck him like a thunderbolt. Mia was gone. Half of her belongings had vanished. Drawers were emptied, her side of the closet bare. The engagement ring he had purchased lay on the marble counter, left behind like it meant nothing. The apartment was cold and hollow. Everything felt unfamiliar. Abigail had hired staff to clean, cook, and care for him, but none of it filled the emptiness Mia left behind. Abigail visited him daily, checking on his health while updating him on the unfolding disaster within his company. "Joseph's moving fast," she informed him one evening. "He's calling board meetings behind your back, making changes, reassigning staff. Mia's attending with him now, sitting right beside him like she belongs there." Richard remained silent, staring out at the skyline. The city that once celebrated his success now whispered about his downfall. He clenched his fist as his chest tightened again. Not from the surgery, but from humiliation. Did the board approve? Anything yet? Richard finally asked. Abigail nodded, her expression grim. They're positioning him as interim CEO under the guise that you need extended recovery time. And Mia? Richard's voice was low but steady. She's backing him entirely. She's already using her shares to support his control. With your absence, most of the board believes you're incapable of leading right now. Richard let out a bitter laugh. I handed her those shares to protect her. I never imagined she'd use them to replace me. Abigail placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. You trusted the wrong people. But it's not over, Richard. You still hold substantial voting rights. You still have leverage. He nodded, slowly. They're playing a game, but I built this company. I know every piece of it better than they ever will. The first board meeting Richard attended after his return was suffocating. Every pair of eyes watched him closely as he entered. The room thinner than before, his face pale but determined. Joseph sat at the head of the table, smug, confident, with Mia proudly seated beside him. Richard, Joseph greeted with a practiced smile, we didn't expect you back so soon. How's your recovery? I'm alive, Richard answered, flatly, taking his seat. His eyes briefly met Mia's. She looked away quickly, her face expressionless. As you know, Joseph continued, we've kept the company running smoothly while you focused on your health. Mia and I have stepped in to stabilize operations. The board has voted to retain me as acting CEO until your full recovery. Richard remained composed. I appreciate everyone's concern, but my doctors have cleared me for work. There was an uncomfortable shuffle among the board members. Joseph's smile tightened. Of course, but given your condition... My condition is fine, Richard cut him off. And as for operations, I'll be reviewing the financials immediately. The board members exchanged nervous glances. Joseph cleared his throat. You may review them, of course, but let's not forget you're still in recovery. We're simply acting in the company's best interest. Richard looked directly at Mia. She lowered her gaze, avoiding his stare. It was the first time since the betrayal that she sat across from him, and her silence said more than words ever could. The meeting continued with Joseph presenting his so-called progress reports. Contracts secured, partnerships expanded. Yet as Richard scanned the reports, he quickly recognized inflated numbers, shallow deals, and short-sighted decisions. Joseph was more interested in appearances than sustainable growth. The man was reckless, unqualified, and using Richard's absence to prop up his own fragile ego. After the meeting, Joseph approached him privately. You should really consider taking more time off, Richard. Your health should be your priority. Richard's expression didn't flinch. My health is fine. You should be more concerned about yours. If you make one more reckless decision with my company, you'll regret it. Joseph's fake smile slipped for just a second before he recovered. I've got everything under control. The board trusts me. Mia trusts me. Richard's eyes narrowed. Enjoy it while it lasts. The tension thickened with each passing day. As Joseph tightened his grip on the company, Mia flaunted their relationship across social media. Lavish dinner parties, weekend getaways, charity galas, always perfectly photographed, always smiling. But behind the camera flashes was a growing storm. Abigail remained Richard's only confidant. They think they've won, she told him one evening. But Joseph's incompetence will catch up to him. The board will turn when they start losing money. I'm counting on it, Richard replied. But I won't sit back and wait. We'll start preparing now. He quietly contacted his legal team and loyal investors. While Joseph relished in his stolen position, Richard began assembling his counterattack behind the scenes. The betrayal had been public, brutal, and humiliating, but Richard wasn't finished. This was only the beginning. They chose the time and place of the first battle, Richard said to Abigail, his voice steady and cold. But I'll choose how it ends. The nights grew heavier as Richard sat alone in his penthouse. The city. Lights flickered beyond the glass windows, but they offered no comfort. Sleep became a rare visitor. His mind circled endlessly around the same images, Mia laughing on Joseph's arm, The wedding invitations being hand-delivered across the elite circles, the whispers of betrayal among their mutual acquaintances. His name used to echo with admiration. Now it was followed by pity. Abigail often stayed late, worried for his well-being. "You need rest, Richard," she whispered gently, setting down a warm cup of tea beside him. "You're driving yourself mad." He stared at the untouched cup. "I don't understand how she changed like this. Was any of it ever real?" Abigail hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Maybe it was, at one time. But some people change when they see an easier path. Joseph was always envious of what you built. And Mia, maybe she grew addicted to attention." Richard closed, his eyes leaning his head back against the couch. "I trusted them both with everything." The hardest part wasn't the business betrayal. It was Mia. She wasn't some passing lover. She was his partner, his family, the one person he thought would never turn on him. For years, he had made sacrifices for her dreams, bought her properties under her name, and even transferred shares to secure her future. Now she stood alongside Joseph, smiling for cameras, pretending their 10-year relationship never existed. Every time his phone buzzed with news articles or social media updates, it felt like another stab in his chest. One headline haunted him for days. "Mia and Joseph, the city's new power couple." His stomach twisted as he read the accompanying photo, Joseph whispering into Mia's ear while she laughed, eyes shining with affection she once reserved for Richard. He thought of the wedding dress he had custom-made for Mia months earlier. It now hung in a boutique, but not for him. She would wear it for Joseph instead, walking down the aisle in the gown he had designed with love. The betrayal wasn't just personal, it was public, deliberate, humiliating. Every shareholder, every business partner, every friend had seen it unfold. The phone calls from associates shifted from concern to quiet distance. Investors who once praised his leadership now whispered doubts, fearful of associating with a man who couldn't even keep his personal life intact. At night, Richard often found himself standing in the empty guest room where he and Mia once spoke about starting a family. The silence in the room was suffocating. The future they had planned, together, now belonged to someone else. And worse, Mia seemed indifferent to the pain she'd inflicted. One evening, as Abigail sat quietly across from him, Richard finally broke the long silence. "Do you think she ever loved me? Or was I always just convenient?" Abigail's voice was soft but honest. "I think she loved you when it suited her. But when the opportunity for something shinier appeared, she didn't hesitate." The weight of her words sank deep. Richard knew she was right. Mia's love had conditions: comfort, status, wealth. The moment those could be found elsewhere, she drifted. The wedding date drew closer. Invitations flooded the city's elite. Abigail handed him a glossy envelope with gold-embossed lettering one morning. It arrived today. He opened it slowly, his hands steady despite the storm inside him. The card was elegant, perfectly curated for public appearance. His name was printed among the invitees, as if mocking him. "They sent me an invitation to their wedding," Richard said flatly. Abigail's jaw clenched. "It's deliberate. They want you to see their victory." Richard's lips curved into a faint, bitter smile. "Victory is temporary. They've mistaken my silence for weakness." Abigail nodded. "The board still believes Joseph's illusion of control, but they're starting to doubt his capabilities. Financial reports are slipping. Several key contracts are behind schedule." Richard's gaze hardened. "Let them dig their own grave. The deeper they go, the harder they'll fall." But even as he plotted his revenge, the emotional weight pressed heavier. He wasn't a man who easily shared his pain, yet when the nights grew too long and the memories too sharp, Abigail was the only one who saw the cracks. "Why does it still hurt so much?" he asked one evening, his voice barely audible. "Because you loved her genuinely," Abigail whispered. "And She threw that love away like it meant nothing. Richard exhaled deeply. I never thought I'd be capable of hate, but every time I see them together, I feel something darker growing inside me. It's not hate, Abigail said softly. It's betrayal, and it's a wound that takes time to heal. Richard leaned forward, gripping the edges of the table. I won't let them win, Abigail. Not in love, not in business, not in anything. I know, she said gently. That's why I'm standing with you. Their eyes met, an unspoken bond forming between them. She was the only one who had never faltered. Through everything, Abigail had been his anchor, while Mia and Joseph tore his world apart. As the days counted down to the wedding, the city buzzed, with excitement. But behind Richard's steady expression burned an unrelenting storm. He would let them enjoy their grand moment. Because when his moment arrived, it would shatter them, and he would be ready. The wedding day arrived. The grand ballroom glittered beneath towering chandeliers, every detail meticulously planned. Photographers captured every polished smile, every staged laugh. High society mingled under golden lights as if nothing could break the illusion of perfection. Mia stood beneath the floral arch, radiant in the very gown Richard had once commissioned for their engagement. The symbolism was suffocating, but she carried no shame. Joseph stood tall beside her, wearing the confident grin that had become his signature ever since stealing Richard's place. As the ceremony began, whispers rippled through the guests. Heads turned toward the entrance. Richard appeared. His tailored black suit contrasted sharply against the pale decor, making his arrival impossible to ignore. A few gasps escaped from the crowd as cameras subtly shifted to capture the moment. Richard walked calmly down the center aisle, his presence casting a chilling weight over the celebration. Mia's confident expression faltered. Joseph's grin stiffened, his knuckles tightening as he grasped Mia's hand. Without acknowledging anyone, Richard approached them. He stopped just a few feet away, pulling a thick envelope from his inner jacket pocket. Mia. Richard's voice was calm, but every word sliced through the room's silence. Before you exchange vows, there's something you both should receive. Mia's breath caught as she stared at the envelope in his hand. Richard, he continued, these are the finalized divorce papers. You were still legally bound to me when you planned this farce. Today, you've broken more than one vow. A collective gasp swept through the crowd. Whispers erupted like wildfire. Mia's face paled, and Joseph's jaw tightened. But don't worry, Richard added coldly. Now you're officially free. He handed the envelope to the stunned officiant, turned without another word, and walked back down the aisle as the murmurs grew louder behind him. Every eye remained fixed on his retreating figure. Outside, Abigail waited beside his car. Her calm expression barely concealed the storm of satisfaction burning inside her. You handled it perfectly, she said, as Richard stepped into the car. They humiliated me publicly, Richard said, his voice low. I returned the favor. As the car drove off, Abigail glanced at him. You're not finished, are you? Richard's stare remained fixed on the road ahead. This was never about the wedding. That was just for show. The real game begins. Now! The very next morning, Joseph's confidence began to crack. Richard's legal team filed motions challenging Joseph's recent business moves made during Richard's recovery, citing conflict of interest, insider manipulation, and unauthorized control. The board, once easily swayed by Joseph's charm, now found themselves in legal chaos. Abigail handed Richard the latest reports. You've got 3 board members reconsidering their loyalty. They were never loyal, Richard replied. Just opportunistic. Joseph gave them promises I never would, but his promises were empty. Now they see that. Mia tried to reach out once the legal battle heated up. She called, texted, and even sent carefully worded emails, each one ignored. Finally, she resorted to a hand-delivered letter. Richard opened it in Abigail's presence. Richard, let's not drag this into something ugly. We can still work this out professionally. I never wanted this to get so complicated. Richard let out a bitter chuckle. She's worried now that everything she and Joseph built is starting to crumble. Abigail folded her arms. She never imagined you'd fight back. She thought you'd disappear quietly. Richard's voice dropped, cold and sharp. They thought I was broken. They thought they won. Now they'll learn who I really am. While Joseph fought to maintain control over the board, Richard met, privately with key investors. Slowly, shares shifted. Voting power realigned. One by one, Joseph's supporters defected, unwilling to sync with him as the company's value fluctuated under growing legal uncertainty. Every meeting, every phone call, every document was calculated. Richard made no impulsive moves. His silence unnerved Joseph more than any public confrontation could have. Within weeks, the once powerful partnership between Mia and Joseph began to erode. Rumors spread about financial mismanagement, missed contract deadlines, and irate clients. Investors started pulling back. Business partners grew hesitant. Mia and Joseph argued behind closed doors, but the damage was irreversible. The public show of unity crumbled under the weight of their unraveling empire. Abigail watched it all unfold. They're drowning. They haven't drowned yet, Richard replied, his gaze cold. But they will. The financial quarter closed with devastating results for the company. Investors withdrew one after another. Contracts were terminated. Once loyal clients fled. After enduring delays, broken promises, and Joseph's arrogance. The empire Richard had built with his own blood was collapsing, except now it was Joseph and Mia who were holding the sinking ship. Mia called again. For days she had tried to reach him. This time Richard answered. Her voice trembled. Richard, please, can we meet? Just once. Richard paused for a moment. Tomorrow, noon, the company conference room. The following day, the air inside. The boardroom was thick. Richard sat at the head of the table, the seat he was always meant to occupy. Across from him, Mia and Joseph entered together, though this time their hands were not clasped. Their faces were pale, the weight of their mistakes heavy on their shoulders. Mia spoke first, her voice softer than Richard had heard in months. Richard, we made mistakes. Joseph and I never intended to hurt you like this. Richard said nothing, his face void of emotion. Joseph cleared his throat, trying to salvage his bravado. We should work together, Richard. We're all professionals. We can still turn this around if we pool our resources. You came to me to negotiate after everything you've done? Richard's voice was cold, steady. After stealing my company, my fiancé, my best friend pretending loyalty while planning my downfall behind my back, and now you sit here asking for partnership? Joseph's mouth tightened. This isn't personal, it's business. Richard's stare darkened. You made it personal the moment you stabbed me in the back while I was fighting for my life on an operating table. Mia's eyes welled with tears. Richard, I was scared. You were sick. I didn't know what would happen. And Joseph, stop, Richard interrupted sharply. Do not insult me with excuses. You both made your choices. Joseph tried again, desperation leaking into his voice. You still hold significant shares. If you want to protect your investment, we need to cooperate. Richard's lips curled into a faint, mocking smile. You really think I came here to protect my investment? Joseph, I came here to finish what you started. He tossed a thick folder onto the table. The legal documents spread out like a blade across the polished surface. Joseph's eyes widened as he skimmed through them, his face turning pale. You filed for full acquisition? The remaining shareholders have agreed to sell their stakes to me. The voting rights have shifted. Effective today, I own controlling interest. You're done. Joseph stood up abruptly. You can't do this! Richard stood too, towering over him. I can, and I did. Mia's voice cracked. Richard, don't do this. You're not like this. You don't know who I am anymore, Richard said. You lost that right when you chose him. Joseph's face twisted. You wouldn't even have built this company without me. Richard's gaze sharpened. Without you? You mean while I was building contracts, you were attending parties? While I negotiated deals, you were busy charming investors I had already secured. You were never a builder. You were always a leech. Joseph's shoulders sank as the weight of the truth collapsed upon him. You'll regret this. No, Richard replied calmly. You'll regret underestimating me. Security guards entered the room, summoned by Richard's prior instruction. Escort Mr. Joseph out of my building, Richard ordered. Joseph's face flushed with anger. Mia, say something. But Mia remained silent, tears running freely down her face. She barely flinched as Joseph was escorted out. Once they were alone, Richard faced her directly. For a brief moment, his voice softened, not with affection, but finality. You had everything, Mia. My love, my trust, my loyalty. And you threw it away for what? Temporary excitement? Status? An illusion? Mia sobbed. I made a mistake. I lost myself. Please, can't we try again? You've always forgiven me before. Please. Richard studied her for a long moment. This was the same woman who once smiled at him with innocence, who once promised him forever. And now, all that stood before him was someone broken, someone hollowed by her own greed. He shook his head slowly. No, Mia, you didn't lose yourself. You showed me who you really were. I simply refused to see it. She collapsed to her knees in front of him, weeping uncontrollably. Please, don't leave me like this. Richard stepped back. I left you a long time ago. You just didn't notice. With that, he turned and walked out, leaving Mia, sobbing alone in the empty conference room. As Richard stepped into the hallway, Abigail was waiting, just as she always had been. Is it done? She asked quietly. It's over, Richard replied. The company is back, and so am I. Abigail smiled gently. I never doubted you. He nodded, exhaling for the first time in what felt like months. Let's go home. But their victory wasn't just personal. Over the next weeks, Richard reorganized the entire company structure. Loyal employees returned, contracts stabilized, investors regained their confidence. Under Richard's leadership, the company thrived once more, stronger, cleaner, and free of betrayal. Joseph disappeared from public view. Word spread that he fled the country, drowning in debts and lawsuits. No one cared enough to follow his fall from grace. Mia, now stripped of influence, quietly filed for bankruptcy. The lifestyle she chased with Joseph vanished overnight. She attempted to reach out several times, but Richard blocked every attempt. His heart, once vulnerable to her pleas, was now impenetrable. One evening, as Richard and Abigail reviewed quarterly growth reports together, she leaned over slightly, speaking with quiet confidence. You didn't just rebuild your company. You rebuilt yourself. He looked at her with genuine gratitude. Because you never left. Abigail smiled warmly. I never will. As they clinked their glasses together, Richard finally allowed himself to feel something he hadn't known for a long time. Peace. For the first time since the betrayal, Richard could breathe. Months passed. The company flourished under Richard's leadership. What was once damaged now stood taller than ever, stronger, leaner, and respected. His name, once whispered with pity, was now spoken with awe. Investors praised his resilience. Clients returned in full force, eager to partner with the man who had risen from public humiliation to absolute control. But Richard's revenge wasn't limited to simply reclaiming his company. Through careful legal channels, his lawyers quietly exposed financial irregularities committed by Joseph during his brief reign. Fraudulent transactions, offshore accounts, falsified contracts, all carefully documented and submitted to the authorities. International arrest warrants were issued. The man who once walked beside him as a brother was now hiding across borders, his reputation annihilated, his freedom slipping away with each passing day. Joseph's betrayal ended not just in failure, but in complete personal ruin. Mia's downfall followed closely behind. Her accounts were frozen. Creditors demanded repayment. The lavish penthouse she once shared with Joseph was seized. The luxury cars were repossessed. Jewelry and designer gowns sold off at auction to pay legal debts. All the glitz and glamour she chased with Joseph evaporated into nothing. Now, stripped of wealth, influence, and status, Mia lived in a small apartment far from the city's bright lights. The woman who once stood confidently beside Richard at Grand Galas now struggled to make rent. And with every door closed, every friend turning away, reality pressed down heavier than ever. But fate wasn't finished with her. One stormy night, Mia stood outside Richard's office building, soaked from the rain. Security guards recognized her but hesitated as she pleaded, desperate to speak to him. Finally, one called Abigail. Inside, Abigail placed her phone down and looked at Richard. "She's downstairs." Richard's face remained unreadable. "Let her in." Moments later, Mia entered the office. Her makeup smeared by the rain, her once perfectly styled hair clinging to her face. She looked like a shell of the woman she once was. The silence between them was suffocating. I didn't know where else to go," Mia whispered, her voice hoarse. "I've lost everything. Joseph's gone. I have nothing left." Richard's eyes never softened. "You had everything once. My trust, my love, my protection. You threw it all away." Tears streamed down her face. "I was wrong. I see that now. You're the only one who truly loved me. You see it now because—" "You have no one left," Richard replied coldly. "Not because you finally realized who I was." She dropped to her knees. "Please, forgive me. Give me one more chance. I'll be different. I'll devote myself to you fully." Richard stood up slowly, his gaze steady. "You want forgiveness not because you love me, but because you have nowhere else to crawl." Mia sobbed uncontrollably. "Please. You used to love me. Doesn't any part of you still care?" "I cared once," Richard said. "That version of me is gone. You killed him." The weight of his words crushed her. She clung to his legs, but he stepped back, letting her hands fall to the floor. "I won't let you back into my life, Mia. You're not even worth my hatred anymore." Her cries echoed as Abigail stepped forward, signaling security. The guards gently pulled her up from the floor. Richard gave one final look as she was escorted out, her cries fading into the hallway. "Close that door," he said. Abigail nodded and closed it behind her. Silence returned. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Richard exhaled, as if shedding the last remnants of his past. "It's finished," Abigail said softly. "It is," Richard answered. Finally. As the months rolled on, Richard continued rebuilding not just his company, but his personal life. The emptiness that once consumed him was gone. In its place stood calm stability, surrounded by people who had never betrayed him. Abigail remained beside him, not as a temporary comfort, but as the steady force who had stood through every storm. She never asked for anything, but her loyalty spoke volumes. One evening, standing on his balcony overlooking the city skyline, Richard turned to her. "You saved me." Abigail smiled faintly. "No, you saved yourself. You stayed when no one else did." "Because you deserved better," she replied. "You always did." He looked at her for a long moment. The weight of years, the betrayal, the pain, the loss, finally felt distant. He reached for her hand, something he had never allowed himself to do before. Abigail didn't pull away. "I see clearly now," Richard whispered, "who truly stood beside me." They stood in silence, hand in hand, as the lights of the city glowed beneath them. A new beginning born from the ashes. Far away from them, In a corner of the city where no cameras flashed and no admirers gathered, Mia lived her life unnoticed. The woman who once stood at the top had nothing left but memories she couldn't escape. And somewhere, in a foreign country, Joseph lived like a fugitive, hunted, broke, and forgotten by the world he once craved. Richard never looked back again. He had won completely, and for the first time his heart finally rested.